It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday morning in Harrison County, the kind of gray, unremarkable start that most people sleep through. A strong cup of black coffee, a stack of sealed indictments resting heavy in a leather satchel, a quiet drive through empty streets toward the courthouse. That was the plan. Instead, the day ended with cold steel handcuffs cutting into the wrists of the most powerful legal figure in the district. When a hot-tempered patrolman decided to aggressively profile a black woman carrying classified documents, he did not simply make a mistake. He dug a deep, irreversible grave for his entire career. Because the woman he slammed against a car in the freezing rain was not a criminal. She was his newly appointed supervising judge. Judge Simone Caldwell did not believe in coincidences. After 22 years climbing the brutal, hyper-political ladder of the state justice system, she had learned that every delayed meeting, every misplaced file, and every overly aggressive police patrol had a root cause. At 48, she had just been sworn in as the chief administrative judge of the 5th Judicial District in Harrison County. Her appointment had unsettled a lot of people. She was an outsider, a black woman brought in from the appellate courts of a neighboring district specifically to clean house in a notoriously corrupt judicial and law enforcement ecosystem. The crown jewel of that corruption was the 27th precinct. At 6:22 a.m., the sky over the city hung low and bruised, a heavy purple that promised a hard rain. Simone sat in the driver's seat of a rented silver Chevrolet Malibu, parked 3 blocks from the Harrison County Courthouse. Her usual vehicle, a sleek black SUV with official judicial plates, sat in the shop after a suspicious tire blowout the evening before. She had not reported the blowout. She already knew who had scattered the industrial nails across her private driveway. On the passenger seat beside her rested a thick, heavily weighted leather satchel. Inside were 4 manila folders bound with thick red rubber bands and stamped in bold black letters, sealed. Eyes only. These were the internal affairs wiretaps and grand jury witness testimonies that directly implicated half a dozen officers from the 27th precinct in an extortion and evidence tampering ring. Simone had spent the entire night reviewing the files in the relative safety of her home. Today she was bringing them to her secure chambers to sign the arrest warrants. She glanced down at her clothes. Because of the early hour and the miserable weather, she had skipped her usual tailored suits. Instead, she wore dark, loose-fitting joggers, a simple gray cashmere sweater, and an oversized beige trench coat to shield the files from the coming rain. A dark blue New York Yankees baseball cap sat low over her braids, shielding her eyes from the biting wind. Without the black robe, she did not look like the iron-fisted chief judge of the 5th District. She looked like an ordinary civilian. She turned the key. The rental's engine purred quietly. She drove the remaining 3 blocks, bypassed the main public parking structure, and turned into the narrow alley that led to the secure gated lot reserved strictly for senior judges and top-tier court administrators. She swiped her new gold-chipped security badge. The heavy iron gate groaned and rolled open. Simone pulled the silver Malibu into the space-marked Reserved Chief Judge C01. 2 blocks away, idling in a squad car half hidden by the morning mist, sat Officer Derek Langford and his rookie partner, Officer Ryan Whitaker. Langford was a 12-year veteran of the 27th Precinct, a man whose personnel file read like a patchwork quilt of excessive force complaints, civilian harassment allegations, and conveniently lost dash cam footage. He was 34, built like a fire hydrant, and operated with the unearned arrogance of someone who believed the badge gave him permanent immunity. He was exactly the kind of officer Simone Caldwell had been brought in to remove. "God, I hate this shift," Langford muttered, taking a sip of lukewarm, bitter coffee from a styrofoam cup. He tossed the cup onto the dashboard. "Nothing happens before 8, just garbage trucks and bums." Whitaker, 23 and barely out of the academy, kept his eyes on the rain-slicked streets. Captain Harlo said we need more visibility around the courthouse. High-profile hearings this week. Harlo's an idiot, Langford sneered. Nobody's hitting the courthouse at 6 in the morning. As Langford turned his head to glare at the imposing granite structure, his eyes caught movement in the alley. Through the drizzle, he saw a silver Chevy Malibu, a basic, generic sedan with ordinary commercial plates, slip through the security gate into the VIP judge's lot. He narrowed his eyes. He knew every vehicle that belonged in that lot. Judge Harrington drove a Mercedes. Judge Cole drove a Lexus. The new chief judge, whoever she was supposed to drive a black SUV. This cheap rental did not belong. "Look at this," Langford said, throwing the cruiser into gear. "We got a lost sheep." "Brad, Derek, the gate opened for them," Whitaker said carefully. "They must have a pass." "Nobody driving a fleet rental Chevy has a pass for the judicial lot, kid. Probably some cleaning staff trying to score free parking, or a paralegal sneaking in early, or someone looking to break into the cars." Langford's pulse quickened. He was bored, heavily caffeinated, and hunting for a target on which to exercise his authority. He flipped on the flashing red and blue lights, siren off, and accelerated down the alley. The iron gate was already beginning to close behind Simone's car. Langford gunned the engine and slipped the cruiser through the narrowing gap just before the gate latched shut. In the reserved parking space, Simone turned off the engine, picked up her heavy leather satchel, and unbuckled her seatbelt. She had roughly 2 hours to prepare the warrants before the court officially opened. Just as she pushed the door open and stepped out into the freezing drizzle, the blinding glare of police light bars washed over her. She froze, squinting against the strobe lights. A patrol car had angled itself aggressively behind her rental, blocking her in completely. The driver's side door of the cruiser kicked open. Officer Derek Langford stepped out, his hand resting casually but purposefully on the butt of his service weapon. "Hey you, stop right there and put your hands on the roof of the car," he barked, his voice echoing off the brick walls of the alley. Simone Caldwell took a deep, steadying breath. She knew the law. She knew her rights. And looking at the badge number illuminated by the cruiser's headlights, she instantly recognized the man walking toward her. It was Officer Derek Langford, the very man whose name was stamped across the sealed indictments currently resting in her left hand. The chess match had just begun. "I said, put your hands on the roof of the car," Langford shouted again, closing the distance. Rain began to fall harder, slicking the pavement and drumming against the metal of the vehicles. Simone did not put her hands on the car. She stood perfectly straight, clutching the leather satchel containing the court files tightly against her chest. She pushed the brim of her Yankees cap up slightly. Her dark, piercing eyes met Langford's aggressive stare. "Officer," she said, her voice calm, measured, and carrying the natural authority of a woman who had spent years commanding courtrooms. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. I am authorized to park here." Langford scoffed, looking her up and down. He saw a black woman in sweatpants, a bulky coat, and a baseball cap driving a cheap rental. In his heavily prejudiced mind, the math was already finished. She was a trespasser, a liar, and now she was defying a direct order. "Authorized? Oh, you're authorized?" he mocked, stepping within 3 feet of her. The smell of stale coffee and cheap cologne rolled off him. Officer Whitaker nervously stepped out of the passenger side, hanging back near the rear of the cruiser. "This is a restricted lot for district judges, lady. Not for the cleaning crew, and definitely not for people driving $20 a day rental cars. Let me see your ID." "My identification is in my briefcase, which is in the trunk of the vehicle," Simone explained, her tone remaining completely even. "If you will allow me to open the trunk, I will gladly provide it. Furthermore, I suggest you lower your voice and step back. You are operating outside your jurisdiction in a secured county facility." Langford's face flushed red. He was not used to being spoken to with such precise, unyielding defiance, especially not from someone he considered beneath him. He pointed a thick, gloved finger at her face. "Don't you tell me how to do my job. You're trespassing on restricted government property. For all I know, you're out here trying to break into the judge's cars. Now hand over whatever is in that bag and step against the vehicle." Simone's grip on the satchel tightened. Inside were the unredacted testimonies of victims Langford himself had extorted. If he got his hands on these files, the entire grand jury investigation would be compromised. The files would disappear before they ever reached a courtroom. "No," she said. The word hung in the cold air, sharp as glass. Langford blinked, momentarily stunned. "Excuse me?" "I said no. You do not have probable cause or reasonable suspicion to execute a search of my person or my property. This bag contains highly sensitive, legally privileged court documents. You will not touch them. I am going to reach into my pocket, retrieve my keys, and open my trunk to show you my identification. That is all that is going to happen here." Langford's ego snapped. "You're not reaching for a damn thing," he roared. He lunged forward, closing the gap in a split second. He grabbed Simone's left arm, his grip painfully tight, and violently yanked her toward him. The sudden physical assault threw her off balance. The leather satchel slipped from her grasp and hit the wet pavement with a heavy thud. The clasp broke open. The 4 manila folders spilled out. The bright red rubber bands held the thick stacks of paper together, but the bold black stamps were clearly visible in the harsh police lights. Sealed. Eyes only. 5th Judicial District Court. Langford looked down at the files. His eyes widened. He did not know exactly what they were, but he knew what court documents looked like. "Stealing court files, huh?" he breathed, a sickening grin spreading across his face. He felt completely vindicated. "Oh, you are going away for a long time, lady." "Officer Langford," Simone said, her voice dropping an octave, losing every trace of civilian politeness. It was the voice of a judge delivering a sentence. "If you do not remove your hand from my arm this instant, you will be facing federal charges for the assault of a state official and the obstruction of justice. Look at me. Look at my face." But Langford was not listening. He was high on the adrenaline of the power trip. "Whitaker, get the files," he barked to his rookie partner. "Wait, Derek," Whitaker stammered, stepping forward, his eyes darting between Simone's unshakable posture and the official-looking documents on the ground. "She knows your name, and she speaks like... Maybe we should let her get her ID. This doesn't feel right." "She knows my name because it's right here on my badge, you idiot," Langford snapped. He violently spun Simone around and slammed her chest and face against the wet, cold metal of the rental car's roof. Simone gasped as the breath was knocked out of her. The cold metal bit through her sweater. Pain flared in her shoulder as Langford wrenched her arms behind her back. "Let him do it," a cold, calculating voice whispered in her mind. "Let him hang himself completely. Let him violate every single protocol. The moment I reveal who I am, he'll backpedal, apologize, and the union will sweep it under the rug. No, I want him on camera. I want him fully committed to his own destruction." "Stop resisting!" Langford yelled, though Simone was entirely compliant, letting her body go limp to avoid a torn rotator cuff. Click, click. The heavy steel handcuffs locked around Simone Caldwell's wrists. They were far too tight, digging into her skin, cutting off circulation. "You're under arrest for trespassing, resisting arrest, and the grand theft of classified government property," Langford sneered, leaning in so close she could feel his breath on her neck. "You picked the wrong day to steal from the courthouse, sweetheart. You are making a catastrophic mistake," Simone whispered against the roof of the car. "The only mistake here was you getting out of bed," Langford replied. He pulled her up roughly by the chain of the handcuffs, ignoring her wince of pain, and dragged her toward the rear of the police cruiser. Officer Whitaker stood frozen in the rain, staring at the scattered files on the ground. He bent down and carefully picked up the heavy manila folders. Water beaded off the thick paper. He looked at the bold stamp. 5th Judicial District Court. He looked up at the woman being shoved into the caged back seat of their cruiser. She was not yelling. She was not crying. She was not begging. She was watching them with the predatory stillness of a hawk. A deep, terrible pit opened in Whitaker's stomach. "Derek," he said quietly, walking over with the files. "We should verify her identity. Right now. Just open her trunk." Langford slammed the back door of the cruiser shut, trapping Simone inside the dark, cage-partitioned back seat. "We'll verify her identity at booking, kid. Once they're in cuffs, they're property of the precinct until the desk sergeant says otherwise. Put the stolen files in the trunk. Let's go." As Langford swaggered around to the driver's side, feeling like the hero of his own imaginary movie, Simone sat perfectly still in the back. The rain pounded against the windows. The handcuffs dug into her wrists. She glanced up at the small surveillance camera mounted in the corner of the cruiser's cage. It was blinking red. Recording. Good, she thought. Record every second. The drive to the 27th precinct took exactly 13 minutes. For Simone, sitting in the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the cruiser, it was a masterclass in psychological endurance. Her wrists throbbed with a dull, rising agony, the metal cuffs biting deeper with every pothole Langford intentionally hit. In the front seat, Langford was riding high. He grabbed the radio mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Bravo. We are returning to the house with one female in custody. Charges of trespassing, resisting, and felony theft of government documents." "Copy that, 4 Bravo," the dispatcher crackled back. "We got a live one, kid," Langford chuckled, glancing at Whitaker. "Caught her dead to rights in the VIP lot trying to make off with sealed dockets. The captain is going to love this. Might even get a commendation for protecting the courthouse." Whitaker did not answer. He was staring straight ahead, his hands sweating on his knees. He could not shake the feeling that they had just stepped off a cliff and had not hit the ground yet. He glanced at the rearview mirror. The woman in the back was not thrashing or screaming profanities the way normal callers did. She was just sitting there, staring a hole into the back of Langford's head. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, taking mental inventory of everything in the car. "Hey, lady," Langford called back over his shoulder, his voice dripping with condescension. "You got a name, or are we booking you as Jane Doe?" Simone remained completely silent. "Silent treatment, huh? That's fine. We got a fingerprint scanner at the station. We'll find out what rock you crawled out from under." Simone shifted her jaw, keeping her breathing steady. She was meticulously cataloging every violation: unlawful detention, assault, failure to read Miranda rights, unlawful seizure of property. The list of infractions was growing long enough not only to fire Langford, but to send him to federal prison. The irony that she was sitting in a police car, handcuffed, while the very documents required to arrest the man driving the car were sitting in the trunk, was not lost on her. It was poetic justice, and she intended to see it through to a devastating finale. The cruiser pulled into the gated rear lot of the 27th precinct. It was a bleak, brutalist brick building that had stood since the late 1970s. The walls seemed to sweat institutional decay. This was the belly of the beast. This was the headquarters of Captain Vincent Harlo's corrupt empire. Langford threw the car in park and killed the engine. He stepped out into the rain, marched over to the rear door, and yanked it open. End of the line, out. When Simone moved too slowly for his liking, her balance thrown off by her bound hands, Langford reached in and grabbed her by the bicep, practically hauling her out onto the pavement. Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself and stood tall despite the awkward, painful position of her arms. Whitaker retrieved the leather satchel full of court files from the trunk. He held it carefully, almost reverently, as if it were a bomb waiting to go off. Langford marched Simone toward the heavy steel back doors of the precinct. "Walk, keep your eyes forward." They entered the bustling, chaotic atmosphere of the precinct's rear booking area. Fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively overhead, casting a sickly pale glow over the peeling linoleum floors. Uniformed officers milled about, drinking coffee, typing reports, or loudly interrogating suspects chained to heavy wooden benches. The air smelled of sweat, cheap industrial cleaner, and stale anxiety. "Hey, Langford," an officer called out from a nearby desk. "Who's the prize?" "Courthouse thief," Langford bragged loudly, ensuring half the room heard him. "Caught her trying to boost sealed files from the judge's lot." Laughter rippled through a few of the nearby cops. Simone ignored them. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the layout, the faces, the lack of discipline. She saw a suspect bleeding from a lip with no medical attention. She saw evidence bags sitting unsecured on open desks. It was a circus. Langford shoved her toward the high wooden counter of the booking desk. Sitting behind the elevated platform, looking exhausted and annoyed, was Desk Sergeant Earl Whitman. Whitman was a 20-year veteran, a gray-haired man who looked as if he had been born tired. "What do we got, Langford?" Whitman asked, not looking up from his computer monitor as his thick fingers pecked at the keyboard. "Jane Doe," Langford said, slamming his hand flat on the counter. "Caught her in the restricted lot at the courthouse. She had a bag full of sealed court documents. Trespassing, resisting, and felony theft." Whitman finally looked up. He looked at the woman in the oversized trench coat, dripping wet, hands cuffed tightly behind her back. He noted her posture. Most people in cuffs slouched. They avoided eye contact. They looked scared or angry. This woman looked like she owned the building. "Take her hat off," Whitman grunted. "Standard protocol, Langford. You know that." Langford reached over and snatched the Yankees cap off Simone's head, tossing it onto the counter. Her dark braids fell around her shoulders. She slowly raised her chin, locking eyes directly with Desk Sergeant Whitman. "Whitaker, put the evidence on the desk," Langford instructed. Whitaker stepped forward nervously and placed the heavy leather satchel and the 4 manila folders on the high wooden counter. Whitman looked at the files. He saw the red rubber bands. He saw the bold black stamps. Sealed. Eyes only. 5th Judicial District Court. Whitman's eyebrows furrowed. He reached out and touched one of the folders. The paper was high quality, heavy stock, real court documents. "Did she break into a judge's car?" Whitman asked, his tone suddenly dropping its bored affectation. "Don't know. She won't talk," Langford said, leaning against the counter. "Caught her getting out of a cheap rental Chevy. Refused to give ID, fought me when I tried to secure the stolen property." "I didn't fight you, Officer Langford," Simone spoke for the first time since the parking lot. Her voice sliced through the noisy booking room like a scalpel. The surrounding chatter began to die down as nearby officers instinctively tuned in to the tone of pure authority. "I informed you that you lacked probable cause, and I denied you consent to search legally privileged documents. You then chose to physically assault me." Langford barked a laugh. "Listen to her, uses big words. She's a professional thief, Sarge. Book her." Desk Sergeant Whitman did not laugh. He was looking closely at Simone's face. There was something intensely familiar about her sharp cheekbones, the intense gaze, the absolute lack of fear. Whitman read the local papers. He watched the municipal news channels. "Ma'am," Whitman said, his voice cautious, "I need your name." Simone stood tall, the cuffs still grinding into her wrists. "My name is Simone Caldwell." Whitman's fingers froze over the keyboard. The name hung in the air. Simone Caldwell. Behind Langford, Whitaker let out a quiet, terrified gasp. He remembered the morning briefing. The captain had passed around a memo. New chief administrative judge sworn in. Simone Caldwell. Whitman swallowed hard. He looked from Simone's face down to the sealed district court files, and then slowly over to the idiot-grinning patrolman leaning on his desk. "Langford," Whitman said, his voice suddenly hollow, stripped of all color. "Where exactly did you say you arrested her?" "The VIP judge's lot, Sarge. Like I said, right next to the spot marked for the chief judge. She was parked right in it. A pin drop could have been heard in the booking room." The silence spread like a virus as the realization hit every officer within earshot. Desk Sergeant Whitman slowly stood up from his chair, his face completely drained of blood. He looked at Simone, taking in the cheap sweatpants, the rain-soaked coat, and the steel cuffs binding her hands. "Judge Caldwell," Whitman whispered, horrified. Langford's grin vanished. He looked at Whitman, then turned slowly to look at the black woman he had just violently slammed against a car and dragged into his precinct. "Yes, Sergeant Whitman," Simone said, her voice echoing in the dead silent room. "And I strongly suggest you tell your officer to remove these cuffs before I dismantle this precinct, brick by brick." The silence in the 27th Precinct's booking room was no longer just quiet. It was suffocating. It was the kind of heavy, pressurized stillness that precedes a devastating explosion. Dozens of police officers, previously wrapped up in the mundane chaos of their morning shifts, were now frozen like statues, their eyes darting between Desk Sergeant Earl Whitman and the black woman in the wet trench coat. Officer Derek Langford let out a harsh, unnatural laugh that echoed awkwardly off the peeling walls. "Judge, Sarge, you're letting her play you," Langford sneered, though a faint tremor had entered his voice. He pointed a finger at Simone. "Look at her. Does she look like the chief judge? She was driving a beat-up Chevy Fleet rental. She's a grifter. She probably read the name in the paper and is using it to—" "Shut your mouth, Langford," Whitman hissed, his voice venomous. A bead of cold sweat tracked down the side of the older sergeant's face. He had seen the official photographs. He had read the internal memos from the mayor's office. The woman standing in front of him, hands bound by his own patrolman, was unequivocally the Honorable Simone Caldwell. "Sergeant," Simone said, her voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "I will not repeat myself. Remove these restraints." Whitman scrambled out from behind the high wooden counter so fast his heavy utility belt caught on the edge of his chair, sending it crashing to the floor. He did not bother to pick it up. He practically sprinted towards Simone, pulling his universal handcuff key from his pocket with shaking fingers. "Sarge, what are you doing?" Langford demanded, stepping forward to intervene. "She's my collar. You can't just uncuff a felony suspect because she drops a name." "Stand down, Langford. That is a direct order," Whitman roared, his face purple with a mixture of terror and rage. He stepped behind Simone. Click, click. The steel jaws released their bite. Simone brought her arms forward slowly. She did not rub her wrists. She simply held them up, turning them slightly so the harsh fluorescent lights illuminated the angry deep red gashes and bruising where the metal had dug into her skin. She made sure the precinct's overhead security cameras had a clear view of the injuries. "Sarge," Langford protested, his ego desperately trying to outrun his sinking realization. "I caught her with sealed files. Look at them. She was trying to steal from the courthouse." "Those files," Simone stated clearly, turning to look directly at Langford, "are the property of my court. They were in my personal possession. You unlawfully detained me. You assaulted me. You illegally searched my vehicle. And you stole classified documents that are part of an ongoing state investigation. You didn't catch a thief, Officer Langford. You committed a federal crime on camera." Officer Ryan Whitaker, who had been standing near the counter, clutching the leather satchel like a life preserver, took 2 distinct steps away from his partner. The rookie looked like he was going to be physically sick. Before Langford could formulate another disastrous response, the heavy oak door to the precinct commander's office violently swung open. "What in the hell is going on out here?" boomed a gravelly, commanding voice. Captain Vincent Harlo strode out onto the floor. Harlo was a man who looked exactly like the brutal politics he played. 55 years old, broad-shouldered, with silver hair slicked back, and a tailored uniform that fit him like a bespoke suit. He was the king of the 27th precinct, a man deeply entrenched in the city's political machinery and a master at burying civilian complaints. He marched toward the booking desk, prepared to dress down whatever officer was causing the disturbance. But as he pushed through the small crowd of paralyzed cops, his eyes landed on the woman standing by the counter. Harlo stopped dead in his tracks, the color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. "Captain," Simone said softly. It was not a greeting. It was a summons. Judge Caldwell," Harlo stammered, his polished, untouchable aura vanishing in a microsecond. He looked at her wet clothes, the red marks on her wrists, and then at Derek Langford, who was still hovering nearby with a look of confused defiance. Harlo's experienced mind did the math instantly. It was a catastrophic sum. "Captain Harlo," Simone replied, "your precinct certainly has an aggressive welcoming committee. Is this how you instruct your officers to greet the chief administrative judge of the 5th District? This is a massive misunderstanding," Harlo said, his voice tightening. He turned his glare onto Langford. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Langford, what did you do?" "Cap, she was trespassing in the judge's lot," Langford pleaded, finally sensing the absolute peril he was in. "She was driving a rental car. She wouldn't show ID. She was carrying sealed dockets. Because it is my lot. Because they are my dockets." Simone's voice cracked like a whip, silencing the entire room. She took a step toward Harlo, completely commanding the space. "My official vehicle was sabotaged last night, Captain. 3 heavy industrial nails driven into the sidewall of my tire while it was parked in my private gated driveway. So I rented a car. As for the ID, your officer refused to let me retrieve it before he physically assaulted me, threw me against the vehicle, and applied handcuffs with malicious force." Harlo closed his eyes for a brief second, visibly calculating the political fallout. It was radioactive. He opened his eyes and plastered on a mask of deep, accommodating concern. "Judge Caldwell, I cannot apologize enough," he said, smoothly, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "This is a gross breach of protocol. Officer Langford is an overzealous idiot, and he will be disciplined severely. We will wipe the booking record immediately. Let me get you a towel, some hot coffee, and I will personally drive you to the courthouse in my cruiser. We can handle this quietly, internally." Harlo reached out toward the wooden counter, aiming for the manila folders sitting next to Simone's satchel. "I'll just take these securely to your—" Simone's hand slammed down on top of the files with the force of a gavel striking wood. "Do not touch those," she warned, her eyes locking onto Harlo's with a terrifying intensity. "You do not have the clearance to view the contents of these folders, Captain, and we will absolutely not be handling this quietly." Harlo's hand froze. He looked down at the bold black stamp. Sealed. Eyes only. A new, darker fear began to blossom in his chest. "Judge," Harlo said, lowering his voice so only she could hear, "please, step into my office. Let's not do this out here on the floor." Simone stared at him for a long, torturous moment. Then she picked up her files, placed them carefully back into her leather satchel, and slung it over her uninjured shoulder. "Lead the way, Captain," she said, "and bring Officer Langford. He's going to want to hear this." Captain Harlo's office was designed to intimidate. It was paneled in dark mahogany, adorned with commendations, photographs with the mayor, and heavily armed tactical unit plaques. A massive polished oak desk dominated the center of the room. Simone walked in, ignoring the guest chairs, and walked directly around the desk. She sat down in Harlo's high-backed leather chair. Harlo stood near the doorway, his jaw tight. Langford followed him in, looking like a dead man walking, while Officer Whitaker lingered nervously in the hallway until Harlo barked, "Get in here and shut the door, Whitaker." The door clicked shut, sealing the four of them in a soundproof tomb. Simone placed the leather satchel on Harlo's desk. She did not speak immediately. She let the silence stretch, letting the anxiety in the room marinate until it was almost unbearable. She watched Langford shifting his weight, rubbing the back of his neck. She watched Harlo staring at the satchel. "I was appointed to this district for one specific reason, Captain," Simone finally began, her voice calm, conversational, and utterly lethal. "The state Supreme Court and the Attorney General's office have been analyzing the conviction rates, the internal affairs complaints, and the civil asset forfeiture records of the 27th precinct for the last 18 months. The numbers are, quite frankly, an embarrassment to the badge." "Judge," Harlo interrupted, trying to regain control of his office. "If this is about Langford, I assure you, do not interrupt me," Simone said. The absolute authority in her tone sat Harlo down in one of his own guest chairs. Langford remained standing, rigid. "As I was saying," Simone continued, "I was brought in to sever the rot. Last night, I finalized the review of a multi-agency task force investigation. I had the sealed indictments ready. I was bringing them to my chambers to sign the arrest warrants this morning." She reached into the satchel and pulled out the first thick manila folder. She snapped the red rubber band off and opened it. "Let's look at the charges, shall we?" she said, trailing a perfectly manicured finger down the top sheet of paper. "Officer Derek Langford." Langford flinched as his name was read. "4 counts of aggravated assault under color of authority," Simone read. 2 counts of evidence tampering. 3 counts of extorting local business owners in the East Side District. And 1 count of witness intimidation, specifically involving a young woman who caught you planting narcotics in her brother's vehicle on a cell phone video. A video, I might add, that we recovered from a cloud server after you unlawfully destroyed her physical phone. Langford's face went chalk white. His knees visibly buckled, and he had to grab the back of Harlo's chair to steady himself. That's a lie," he whispered, but there was no conviction in it. "It's not a lie, Derek." Officer Whitaker spoke up from the back of the room, his voice shaking. Everyone turned to look at the rookie. Whitaker swallowed hard. "Internal Affairs pulled me in 3 weeks ago. They asked me about the East Side patrols. They showed me the dash cam footage you thought you deleted." "You rat!" Langford lunged toward his partner, but Harlo jumped up and slammed a heavy hand against Langford's chest, shoving him back. "Sit down and shut up, Langford," Harlo roared, his polished facade cracking completely. He turned back to Simone, desperately trying to salvage his own survival. "Judge Caldwell, I swear to you, I had no idea Langford was operating like this. If I had known—" "Save the performance, Captain." Simone cut him off, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. She reached into the satchel and pulled out the second manila folder. She snapped the rubber band. "Let's continue," she said softly. "Captain Vincent Harlo." The blood left Harlo's face so fast he looked like a corpse. He fell back into his chair. "You didn't think I was just here for a rogue patrolman, did you?" Simone asked, leaning forward, resting her elbows on his desk. "Let's review your file, Captain. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, racketeering, 8 counts of receiving illegal kickbacks from the Gold Star Bail Bonds Agency, a business officially owned by your brother-in-law. Oh, and my personal favorite, directing your officers to systematically reroute confiscated cash from narcotics raids into a precinct slush fund that paid for your vacation home in Boca Raton." You can't prove any of that," Harlo gasped, his chest heaving as a panic attack threatened to overtake him. "That's hearsay. That's a witch hunt." "We have the bank transfers, Vincent," Simone stated coldly, dropping his title. "We have the wiretaps from the phones you bought using burner accounts. We have the sworn testimony of 3 of your own sergeants who took plea deals yesterday afternoon to avoid federal prison. The walls aren't closing in, Captain. They are already closed." Harlo's eyes darted frantically around the room. He looked at his locked door. He looked at the heavy brass paperweight on his desk. His mind, backed into a corner, was cycling through desperate, violent options. Simone saw the shift in his eyes. She knew exactly what he was calculating. "Don't even think about it," she warned, leaning back in the chair, totally relaxed. "You think my tire blowing out last night was a surprise? I expected you to try and slow me down. You think I drove a cheap rental car this morning by accident?" Harlo frowned, confusion battling the panic. "What?" "The silver Chevy Malibu," Simone smiled, a sharp, terrifying expression. "It belongs to the state attorney general's fleet. It is a bait car. It is wired with 3 hidden high-definition cameras, external microphones, and a continuous GPS uplink to the state police barracks." Langford let out a whimpering sound. "Every single thing Officer Langford did to me in that parking lot was broadcast live, in real time, to a federal task force," Simone explained, watching the utter destruction of their hope. "The moment he put handcuffs on me, he triggered a designated emergency protocol. Do you know what happens when a sitting chief administrative judge is taken hostage by corrupt police officers?" Harlo could not speak. He just shook his head slowly. "Look out your window, Captain," Simone commanded softly. Harlo turned his head, staring through the heavy Venetian blinds of his office window, which overlooked the precinct's front parking lot. The rain was still pouring down, but the gray morning was now illuminated by a sea of flashing red and blue lights. There were no precinct cruisers out there. Instead, there were sleek, unmarked black SUVs, heavily armored tactical vehicles, and dark blue state trooper interceptors blocking every single exit. Dozens of heavily armed men and women wearing tactical vests emblazoned with FBI and state police were spilling out of the vehicles, raising their rifles and forming a perimeter around the 27th precinct. "They aren't coming to bail you out, Vincent," Simone said, closing the files and neatly stacking them on the desk. "They're coming to take my building back." The heavy soundproof door of Captain Harlo's office muffled the sudden explosion of noise from the booking room, but it could not hide the vibration of the floorboards. The 27th precinct was being breached. Through the frosted glass of the office partition, Harlo and Langford watched in paralyzed horror as heavily armored tactical units poured through the rear and front entrances simultaneously. The loud, booming voice of a federal agent cut through the precinct's ambient noise, amplified by a bullhorn. "Federal agents, stand down! Step away from your desks and keep your hands where we can see them." Out on the floor, Desk Sergeant Earl Whitman did not even attempt to reach for his weapon. He slowly raised his hands and laced his fingers behind his head, sinking to his knees before a tactical officer even reached him. Several other corrupt patrolmen, men who had felt untouchable just 10 minutes prior, were swiftly disarmed and pushed against the very brick walls they used to press suspects against. Inside the mahogany-paneled office, Captain Harlo finally found his voice. It was frail, stripped of all its former booming bravado. "Simone, Judge Caldwell," Harlo pleaded, taking a desperate step toward the desk. "We can make a deal. I know where the cartel money is buried. I have the ledger for the local judges who look the other way. I can give you the mayor's chief of staff. Just let me make a phone call." Simone did not move. She remained seated in his luxurious leather chair, her expression carved from stone. "You misunderstand your position, Vincent," she replied, her voice eerily calm against the backdrop of the chaos outside. "You are no longer a power broker. You have nothing to trade because my task force already has the ledger, the accounts, and the wiretaps. You are just a man who is going to spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary." Before Harlo could utter another word, his office door was kicked open with enough force to crack the doorframe. 3 FBI SWAT operators flooded the room, their rifles raised and lasers painting the chests of Harlo and Langford. Right behind them stepped Special Agent in Charge Raymond Vargas, a tall, no-nonsense veteran of the Bureau's Anti-Corruption Division. He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the suspects before landing on Simone. "Judge Caldwell," Agent Vargas said, giving a curt, respectful nod. Are you injured? Simone slowly stood up from the desk, picking up her leather satchel. I have some minor bruising from the unlawful restraint, Agent Vargas. Aside from that, I am perfectly fine. Vargas turned his attention to the two men standing in the center of the room. Officer Derek Langford was trembling violently. The aggressive, hot-headed cop who had violently slammed a black woman against a rental car less than 2 hours earlier was now openly weeping, tears mixing with the rain still on his cheeks. Derek Langford, Vincent Harlo, Vargas announced, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's sentence. You are under arrest for racketeering, extortion, wire fraud, civil rights violations, and assaulting a state official. Hands behind your backs. I didn't know, Langford sobbed, as two SWAT operators grabbed him roughly, twisting his arms behind him. I didn't know she was a judge. It was a mistake. The mistake wasn't who you assaulted, Langford, Simone said quietly as she walked past him. The mistake was that you thought the badge made you a god. Today, you learned you're just a mortal. Click, click. The sound of federal handcuffs locking around Langford's wrists echoed in the room. It was a poetic symmetry that brought a cold satisfaction to Simone's chest. Harlo, for his part, remained stoic, though his eyes were completely dead. He offered no resistance as he was cuffed and led out of his own office in disgrace. As the operators cleared the room, leaving only Simone, Agent Vargas, and the terrified rookie Ryan Whitaker, Vargas paused. What about this one, Judge? Vargas asked, nodding toward Whitaker, who was pressed against the bookshelf, looking like he expected to be shot. Simone looked at the young man. She remembered how he had hesitated in the parking lot. She remembered how he had handled the sealed files with care, and how he had tried, however weakly, to de-escalate his partner's violence. More importantly, she remembered that he had secretly cooperated with Internal Affairs 3 weeks earlier, providing the dash cam footage that cemented Langford's downfall. Officer Whitaker is a cooperating federal witness, Simone stated. He will be escorted safely to the Attorney General's office to finalize his deposition. See that he gets there securely, Raymond. Whitaker let out a shuddering breath, his knees nearly giving out. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. Don't thank me, Officer Whitaker, Simone warned, her tone softening only slightly. You stood by while a man abused his power. You are getting a second chance because you finally chose the right side of the line. Make sure you never cross it again. With that, Simone Caldwell adjusted her oversized beige trench coat, tightened her grip on her leather satchel, and walked out of the precinct commander's office. She strode across the chaotic booking floor, past the handcuffed, disgraced officers who had once ruled the East Side, and stepped out the front doors into the pouring rain. A sleek black FBI SUV was idling at the curb, its back door held open by a federal agent. Simone climbed inside. The heavy door slammed shut behind her, finally insulating her from the storm. By 12:47 p.m., the rain had finally stopped, giving way to a pale, piercing sunlight that washed over Harrison County. The local news networks were in an absolute frenzy. Helicopters circled the 27th precinct, broadcasting live footage of the FBI hauling out boxes of evidence, computers, and files. The breaking news chyron at the bottom of every screen read in bold, flashing letters, "Massive corruption, bust at 27th precinct. Captain and dozens of officers arrested." Inside the Harrison County Courthouse, the atmosphere was electric with hushed whispers and panicked phone calls. Judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys were glued to the televisions in the break rooms. The untouchable fortress of the local police had fallen in a single morning. In her secure private chambers on the top floor of the courthouse, Judge Simone Caldwell sat at her heavy oak desk. The room was immaculate, lined with volumes of state statutes and legal precedent. The cheap sweatpants and the oversized trench coat were gone. Her senior clerk, a sharp young woman named Claire Donovan, knocked softly on the heavy wooden door before entering. She carried a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea and a fresh stack of dockets. "Your tea, Judge," Claire said, setting the cup down carefully. She looked at Simone with a mixture of profound awe and lingering concern. "The mayor's office has called 6 times. The governor's office called twice. They all want statements." "Let them leave voicemails, Claire," Simone replied smoothly, taking a sip of the tea. The warmth soothed her throat. Agent Vargas also called to confirm that Vincent Harlo and Derek Langford have been processed at the federal holding facility. Bail was denied as they are considered severe flight risks, Claire reported, a faint smile touching her lips. "Excellent," Simone murmured. She opened the heavy leather satchel that sat on the corner of her desk. She withdrew the 4 manila folders, the very same folders that had been thrown onto the wet pavement of the parking lot. The folders that Langford had so arrogantly claimed as stolen property. She took out a black fountain pen, uncapped it, and systematically went through the paperwork. One by one, she signed her name with deliberate sweeping strokes at the bottom of the federal arrest warrants, retroactively authorizing the sweep that had just taken place. The trap had worked flawlessly. The corrupt network had been so blinded by their own prejudice and unchecked power that they had eagerly arrested the one person capable of ending their careers, dragging the evidence of their own destruction directly into their headquarters. Simone stood up from her desk. She walked over to the mahogany wardrobe in the corner of her chambers and opened it. Inside hung her judicial robe, a heavy flowing garment of pure black. She slipped it on, feeling the familiar, grounding weight of the fabric settle onto her shoulders. She adjusted the collar, ensuring it sat perfectly straight. The bruising on her wrists throbbed slightly beneath the billowing sleeves, a lingering reminder of the morning's violence. But it was a pain she welcomed. It was the price of the purge. "Are we ready for the afternoon docket, Claire?" Simone asked, her voice echoing with commanding resonance in the quiet room. "We are, Your Honor. The courtroom is full." Claire held the door open. Judge Simone Caldwell walked out of her chambers and down the long carpeted hallway toward courtroom 301. The bailiff, an older gentleman who had served the court for 30 years, stood at attention as she approached. He opened the heavy double doors leading to the bench. "All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed across the packed, murmuring courtroom. Instantly, the chatter ceased. Every lawyer, every defendant, and every spectator stood up in total silence. Simone ascended the steps to the elevated bench. She looked out over the room, her piercing gaze sweeping across the faces of the legal establishment. They all knew what she had done that morning. They knew that the era of backroom deals, protected officers, and judicial blindness was officially dead. She sat down in her high-backed leather chair. "You may be seated," Simone commanded. She picked up her wooden gavel, feeling the smooth, polished handle in her grip. She raised it into the air and brought it down against the sounding block with a sharp, echoing crack that signaled the beginning of a new order in Harrison County. "Court is now in session."